Hillary Clinton had a lot of plans. I've read through a lot of the positions of the vice president. Don't agree with a lot of them, but they're specific as hell. I think the issue is it's just not resonating with people. People that look at her, they think, well, a very smart woman. She's a capable woman. She's had a lot of successes in her career. And yet none of that is resonating with the average person, including those within her own party, which is why there's still some fractures within her base.
Listen, for a race that is evenly divided, okay, it is a tied race. We cannot make blanket statements. It's not resonating.
Yeah.
Because it's a tied race. And if all the things you're saying are true, it's not resonating. The economy is bad. The mood of the country typically is an anti-incumbent mood. Donald Trump would be leading, but he's not.
So let me reframe my statement then to make this a little bit more clear. She's not where she needs to be compared to where Biden was at this point, 13 days out. She's not where Hillary Clinton was 13 days out, to add some more specificity.
Sure. Yes.
So my point is, there's something obviously there that is not coalescing the entire Democratic base around the vice president. That's up for her and her campaign to figure out.
I mean, I think that to your point, though, ago was a different environment.
Sure.
Joe Biden wasn't the incumbent 4 years ago. She wasn't the incumbent vice president. So it is a little bit of a different situation.
Okay, well, what about Hillary Clinton? Let's go to Hillary Clinton then.
Yeah.
Woman, incredibly intelligent, probably one of the most experienced individuals to ever run for the office.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about this pretty good debate here between Mark Cuban and Scott Jennings, in which Scott Jennings is going to school Mark Cuban on why Trump's campaign is doing well and Kamala's campaign is failing, why Trump is going to be a better president than Kamala Harris. And I want to react to it because I think that this is a pretty good exchange. And it really shows you that Mark Cuban, for as much as he tries to accuse President Trump of being a snake oil salesman, this guy is actually the snake oil salesman trying to sell the American people Kamala Harris. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it.
Question, Mark, I'll start with you. If Donald Trump wins this race, what do you think is the one thing that worked in his favor for why he won?
He's a relentless salesperson that doesn't care about the facts. He's that sales guy on the car lot that'll tell you that the 1992 Corolla is a Rolls Royce. And if you say it enough time, people will start to believe it.
Wow. Again, the thing about these people, whether they're Democrats or Kamala Harris surrogates, they're projecting. Everything they say about Trump is the exact same thing that applies to Kamala Harris and Democrats, but is much worse, right? This guy really wants you to believe that Kamala Harris is going to be better for business than Trump, that Kamala Harris has a better business mind than Trump, that Kamala Harris understands entrepreneurs and business owners better than Trump. Although Kamala Harris has never owned a business, I don't think that Kamala Harris has ever worked in the private sector. She's worked for the government her whole life. She's lived off taxpayer funds her whole life. And she has never done anything to the level that Trump has done to suggest that she knows anything at all, even close to what Trump knows about running a business and being an entrepreneur. But if you listen to Mark Cuban, though, Kamala Harris understands entrepreneurs better than Trump. And you try to tell me Trump is the one that's a used car salesman, right? Not you, not Kamala Harris, because what you're trying to sell me, again, is a load of crap, okay? You're trying to sell me a crap sandwich with Kamala Harris. That's exactly what they're trying to do, okay? And they all know it. That's the crazy part about it, because just a year ago, the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Elizabeth Warren, you'd be hard-pressed to get these people to actually say anything positive about her. Now, all of a sudden, she's amazing. She's great. When just a year ago, Democrats were thinking about replacing her. There was talks about replacing her. So, again, when you're talking about somebody trying to sell me a used car that's actually bad and trying to sell it as if it's the greatest thing ever, that's exactly what Kamala Harris is. No doubt.
Scott, I know you don't like to say a lot of nice things about Harris, but if she wins, what do you think is the one reason that you would attribute that to if you had to guess right now?
Oh, if I had to guess, it would probably be mobilization of women voters around the issue of abortion. I mean, if you look at all the polling, it's the one issue that works for her. She's got a wide lead on it.
That's what she's talking about tonight in Texas.
What she's talking about tonight. It seemed to mobilize Democrats in the midterms, although it's a different electorate this time. But if that is the result, it will likely be attributable to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way that she wins at this point. Like, that would legitimately be the only explanation, that and, of course, finagling. But Again, if it's legitimate, right? Like, that is the only way that Kamala Harris can legitimately win at this point, is if we have a repeat of 2022. And I am praying to God, I am hoping to God that does not happen. We cannot allow these women to essentially vote this country off of a cliff because of one issue, right? An issue that Kamala Harris is not going to do anything about because she doesn't have the power as president. She's not going to have the Congress needed to codify Roe v. Wade into law. And even if she did, it's going to be overturned by the Supreme Court. Okay, this is a state's issue. It's not a federal issue. And these women voting in federal elections based off an issue that's not a federal issue that the federal government can't do anything about is ignorant. Okay, and that's what Democrats are running on right now. They're running on ignorance because they believe that their voters are ignorant, right? So that's the only thing she got. Right, there would be no other explanation for why Kamala Harris wins outside of these women showing up and voting for her because of that one issue, which I'm praying to God doesn't happen. I'm actually hoping that the opposite happens, that happened in 2022. I think the opposite is going to happen. Hopefully the opposite happens in 2024, where you have men come out like never before and vote against Kamala Harris and vote for Trump, right? That's what we need to happen. We need men, particularly young men, to step up and to save this country. We need young men to get out there and to vote like never before for Trump. Okay, that's what needs to happen. Because the issues that young men are worried about, the economy, the border, war, okay, those things are much more important right now than the issue of abortion or abortion access, right? Let's be more specific here.
I mean, when you look at this race and you're watching this as a huge surrogate for hers, you know, you've been out there. And what's interesting about you is you kind of take the arguments against Harris. Some of the ones we've heard from Scott, you know, on the economy and whatnot. She has cut Trump's lead on the economy by a significant amount from where it was when it was Biden and Trump in this race. Is it enough, though? I think is going to be the major question when you look at how voters are seeing this.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. When you're promising handouts for everybody, right? Handouts to start businesses, handouts for having kids, handouts for everything. Yeah, I mean, you're probably going to close the gap when it comes to the economy because unfortunately, not enough people in this country have learned from what happens when the government gives too many handouts to people and corporations, which is inflation, right? That's the reason why we had the massive inflation is too many handouts. And Kamala Harris, lo and behold, does what all Democrats do because they have nothing else except handouts, comes around with some more handouts. And of course, yeah, she's going to close the gap, but it's not going to be enough because ultimately people know the results of the Biden-Harris administration when it comes to the economy versus the results that we got under Trump, right? And I just don't think that the handouts are going to be enough. Hopefully, the American people don't fall for this too much.
She just has to reduce it on the margins. She's better for business. There's 33 million companies in this country. 99% of them are small business. 99% of those are pass-through. And 99% of the CEOs and entrepreneurs that run them make $400,000 or less. So effectively, for every company in this country, your taxes are going to be the same or lower. We just have to get that word out. And I think that's why she's closing the delta.
That's not true. That's not true. Again, ask Kamala Harris whether or not she's going to extend the Trump tax cuts, okay? Again, I don't understand why anybody has not asked her this question directly. Since you say you do not want to raise taxes on people making $400,000 or less, are you going to let the Trump tax cuts expire or are you going to extend them? Somebody needs to get her on record, right? Because she keeps saying that I'm not going to raise taxes on anybody making less than $400,000 a year, but yet she keeps talking about how the Trump tax cuts are bad, right? The Trump tax cuts are only for the rich. Somebody needs to get her on record answering the question about whether or not she's going to let those tax cuts expire or what, right? Because I personally believe that they're going to let them expire. And if they let them expire, your taxes will go up, okay? That's exactly what's going to happen. And with all the spending that they're probably going to try to do, inflation is going to go up, especially if interest rates continue to go down. If the government decides they want to start spending money again because Democrats are in charge, inflation is just going to go back up, right? That's exactly what's going to happen. And we know that inflation is a tax on the middle class and the poor, people with the least amount of assets in this country. It's a tax on them. And again, their taxes did in fact go up during the Biden-Harris administration. It just came in the form of inflation. That's what happened.
Yeah, I disagree. I think the reason Trump is winning and will win ultimately on the issue of the economy is the comparative. I mean, look at the polling. his job approval retrospectively is far higher than the Biden-Harris job approval today. There's one reason for that, because people feel economic anxiety today that they did not feel under Donald Trump. They didn't feel the inflation under Trump. And they don't really believe that Biden and Harris either have a handle on it at best, or they've made it worse. And I think it's a change election. And honestly, Trump's best argument on the economy is you can't leave the same people in charge. If you're feeling economic anxiety, you got to go back to what you know works. And honestly, he's more popular now than he's ever been. His administration is more popular than it's ever been. And look where he came from when he left office to right now. There's one reason why he's more popular today than he's ever been, because people are comparing it to what they've got now, and they're saying, I want to go back.
And yet it's a dead heat against somebody who's only been in the race 13 weeks.
Well, you act as though she just landed here on a spacecraft 13 weeks ago. She's been the vice president for an entire term.
But there's a
she was in the
between...
United States Senate. She did not show up here 13 weeks ago. She has a record as vice president, and I think what's hurting your campaign is that she also has a record when she ran for president. And she said a lot of things that have come back to haunt her.
That's a different world. I mean, I can go back 10 years when Donald Trump said he wanted to tax oil companies out of existence. You can talk about Section 230. You can talk about Bitcoin. You can talk about abortion. There's a long list of things that Donald Trump has flip-flopped on.
But he was the president, and he has a record, and she was the vice president, and she has a record.
Yeah, but what kind of record? But you know that whole comparison isn't legit, because the vice president doesn't do anything. What did Mike Pence do?
Well, I disagree. I actually think she has been the most consequential vice president when you consider the responsibilities that she was given, when you consider that Joe Biden has said she was there every step of the way. And finally,
you know it.
She cast more tie-breaking votes than any other vice president. She cast
well, that's because
the votes.
The Senate, because of the nature of the Senate, had nothing to do with her being special. You know, that's just the job.
She cast the most consequential economic votes of any vice president in our history.
But what we have to talk about is what her plan is for now.
Wow. You know, again, these people act like Kamala Harris is the strongest and weakest vice president in history at the same time, right? They want to have their cake and eat it too, okay? They want to give Kamala Harris credit for all of the good things that the Biden-Harris administration did, although they didn't really do much good, so that's why they don't really talk much about what they did, okay, because they didn't do anything particularly good. But yeah, they want to pretend as if Kamala Harris had nothing to do with the disasters of the administration when she was board as czar, and as Scott Jennings said, she cast these tie-breaking votes for the pieces of legislation that caused inflation and tanked the economy. She has to take responsibility for that, right? Because ultimately, as a tie-breaking vote, that is her vote. That's not Joe Biden's vote. It's not anybody else's vote. That's her vote. I mean, that's the whole point. As vice president, you have the last say in regards to whether or not you think that this is good legislation, whether or not this legislation should pass, right? There are things that Kamala Harris could have done in that position as the most powerful vice president in history. Like, that's an objective fact. Kamala Harris was the most powerful vice president in American history. And what did she do with that power? Well, according to Mark Cuban and Democrats, she did nothing, right? As she allowed the country to be subject to bad legislation. So what does that say about her, right? Either way that Democrats try to argue this, it's just not a good argument. You could argue that, yeah, she was responsible for a lot of this stuff. And if you argue that, then that's bad for her, because that means she was responsible for the disasters, right? You could argue that she wasn't responsible for it and she did nothing as VP, but objectively speaking, she had the votes, right? She had a say. So if she had the power, which you can't dispute that she had the power, and she did nothing with it as VP, if she just went along with everything that Democrats wanted to do despite it being bad, that's also not good for her, right? So again, these people, it's just so funny. They want to say that she had no power, but yet she did. And if your argument is that, well, she didn't do anything with that power, then again, that's just not good, right? That's also bad for her, okay? Because again, she just went along to get along instead of actually, I don't know, using her judgment and saying, okay, maybe it's not a good thing to massively overspend, right? Or maybe it's not a good thing to tell the IRS to go after tip wages, which is what she did in the Standard of Living Reduction Act. Also, on top of that, furthermore, Mark Cuban wants to say, well, she's only been in a race for like 90 days. The American people don't know her, in which Scott Jennings correctly rebutted and saying that, no, she was a senator. She also was VP, so this idea that people didn't know her is just nonsense. But the more that people do get to know her, right, she has been in a race for 90 days, and she peaked when she first got in the race, right? When she first got in the race, that's when she peaked, okay? And as soon as people started to learn more about her and her record, that has led to her decline, right? The more interviews that she does, the more that she declines, right? The less support that she gets. So it's not like she's getting better, okay? Which, again, Mark Cuban's argument would actually be a decent argument if she was actually getting better, okay, as time went on. But the exact opposite is happening. She's actually getting worse the more that people learn about her. So again, the whole 90 days thing is silly because, like I told you guys at the beginning of all this, because apparently I have a better understanding of politics than a vast majority of these individuals on television, the liberals who've been doing this a lot longer than me. Politicians don't get more popular over time, right? That's not what happens, okay? Unless there's some retrospective analysis in which people realize they've been lied to, like what is happening with Trump, right? The mainstream media lied about how bad his administration was, right? You had to go through the Kamala Biden administration to realize how good Trump actually was. But anyways, in a vast majority of cases, right, politicians do not get more popular. The more that people learn about a politician, the less popular that the politician gets, right? This is why I was never really worried about the Kamala Harris surge during a honeymoon phase, because first and foremost, her numbers never look better than Hillary's numbers. They never look better than Biden's numbers. And because they never got close to those numbers, despite the fawning praise from the mainstream liberal media and all this other stuff, I knew, I was like, okay, yeah, well, she's peaking, right? She's going to peak. She's not going to get much further, okay? She's not going to get much more support. Like, this is her peak. This is how I knew that was her peak, because her numbers weren't as good as they should have been, right? Despite the fawning coverage from the media. And I knew that once she peaked, that it would be nothing but downhill from there, because once people start to learn about who she is and what she stands for, which is basically anything, right? Then she probably would lose a lot of support, because that's exactly what happened during the Democrat primary. That's always what happens to politicians, okay? When the American people get to know them, they become more disliked, right? That's what happens 99% of the time.
Right? Look at healthcare.
Great question.
Her plan for healthcare. She's talked about going after the pharmacy middleman, in particular the PBMs who set the prices for medications. She's talked about adding transparency. That alone, I know from my experiences, will cut the cost of medications and then eventually healthcare for every household by 20 to 30%.
I agree with you on PBMs, by the way. One. Two, I will say, when she had her town hall this week, she got asked a simple question by a voter: what's the first bill you would pass? And had absolutely no answer for it. It wasn't an economic bill. It wasn't immigration. It wasn't health care. It was, I don't really know.
But let's go back to
what kind of confidence does that give you that she's ready to lead?
Yeah, because she puts together a team. She's a team leader, as opposed to Donald Trump.
We don't vote for team. We vote for
yes,
presidents.
We do vote
we
for
vote
team.
for presidents.
No, we vote for, if you're smart.
Who's on the ballot?
Who's on the ballot obviously leads the way, but who's on your team makes a big difference. On one hand, you have Donald Trump, where 40 out of 44 of his staff just turned against them. I've never seen that happen to anybody in any circumstances, ever. I've never seen a company like that, ever.
Not just turned against him, called him a fascist. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, his cabinet just went, you don't belong in government at all. What does that say? Whereas with Kamala Harris, you don't see that. In fact, you see her putting together a good team.
Well,
one time with her office, she had a bad experience.
I disagree. She's had a 92% turnover.
Yeah, one time
she's had a
years
rough
ago.
ride with staff.
Yeah, but you haven't seen that in the last 4 years.
You've seen it her entire career. It happened when she was Attorney General. It's happened when she's Vice President. I think she actually has a pretty rough track record of leadership when you consider the people who've washed through there.
So 90
now expand that out to the entire federal government.
Yeah, 90% of people in her cabinet you think will turn on her?
I'm saying that she has not had a good record of staff management in small groups. Now she's managing the whole federal government.
Small groups are harder. It has somebody who's managed. Small groups are harder because it's more personal.
But if the argument is turnover is bad, I mean, Donald Trump is the king of turnover. So that is a bad bar.
And on top of that, he's using loyalty as a mechanism to determine.
Listen to Caitlin Collins sticking her opinion in this. Again, as a neutral journalist who's supposed to let these guys just duke it out, she's sticking her little opinion in it to side with Mark Cuban, to give Mark Cuban some help, because Scott Jennings came with a perfect counter argument to, again, these talking points about how Trump, his staff, like I said, he had to fire some people. Well, Kamala Harris, throughout her whole career, has had high staff turnover. So again, that's a wash, right? That's an absolute wash when it comes to that argument. But again, Caitlin Collins can't help herself, sticking her opinion in it, siding with Mark Cuban and against Trump. These people make me sick. These so-called journalists make me sick. They really do. Because they never do that in order to help out Trump and Republicans. But they do it when Democrats clearly are struggling, which is what Mark Cuban is doing right now.
Determine who he's going to hire. That's Tony Soprano.
Every president uses loyalty to their agenda to decide.
No,
I work for George W. Bush. You had to be loyal to the president's agenda. I'm sure Joe Biden did the same thing. They're politically elected. It's their prerogative to have loyal people.
It's their prerogative, but that doesn't make it the best people to solve the problems. She's already said.
Do you think she's going to hire people who disagree with her?
I think she. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it. She hasn't disagreed with everything I've said to her by a long shot, but she listens. She's open-minded. She's not dogmatic. That's critical. Being dogmatic is the difference between being good as a president.
I think she has displayed this week and throughout October in her interviews an extreme amount of indecisiveness. And in Kentucky, they say the only thing in the middle of the road is yellow lines and dead squirrels. And I'm afraid she's going to find herself one or the other come election day.
Speaking of what staffing would look like.
Yeah, I actually agree with Scott Jennings on that, because the argument that Mark Cuban is making is that, well, Kamala's surrounding herself with a diversity of opinions. And yes, I think that can play to your advantage when you're talking about building an organization. However, you do have to have ideological cohesiveness, right? There has to be a balance, because if you have too many different opinions, okay, and you're giving everybody a say, then you're not going to go anywhere. There's going to be a lot of friction in regards to what to do. And I think that Scott Jennings brought up a good point. What you're saying from Kamala Harris right now, and the fact that she's indecisive about anything, right? She can't commit to any real policies or anything like that, is probably because her team, there are too many opinions. There are too many voices in the room who are not all aligned with the same goals and objectives, right? Again, you have to have some ideological cohesiveness, right, in order to get things done. Because if you don't, again, you're going to be stuck arguing too much rather than actually getting things done. Again, if it's too many different people in the room. Again, this is the type of stuff that Mark Cuban, he claims that, he's an expert in, but I mean, clearly he's not, right? Clearly he lacks some understanding here in regards to how stuff actually works. But again, he's built successful organizations, so he actually really knows. He's just playing his role, trying to get Kamala Harris elected so that he can get a job with the government and going after businesses and entities that he don't like. That's essentially what he's trying to do.
If she does win, would you take a job, and what job would you want?
No, I don't want a job. Costplusdrugs.com is changing healthcare. I can do more on the outside than the inside. I can still be an advisor.
How are you going to feed yourself if you don't take one of these jobs?
I'll find a way, Scott.
This guy's a liar. This dude literally said that he wanted the SEC job, right? That's literally what he said just a few weeks ago. So now all of a sudden, I don't want a job. I don't want a job. This lying guy. This guy is such a clown.
But I ask you, Mark, whether you would entertain being a Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary in a Harris
Head of the
administration.
SEC. Head of the SEC. That's the job I would take. Find
Scott, if
a
Donald
way.
Trump wins, would you take a job in his administration?
I have a terrific job here at CNN.
Right? What piece that?
It is my sincerest desire to continue to be here with you on.
So
Friday
everyone's
night.
keeping their jobs. Scott Jennings.
I don't know that. He's more secure that I'm the poorest guy at the table. I don't know what's going to happen to me.
Yeah, there's only one billionaire among us.
Yeah. So you seen that, you heard that. I think that, again, Mark Cuban is a clown, right? I really do. I think that he's exactly who he claims Trump is. And I think that his jealousy of Trump, his hatred of the fact that Trump did not want to accept his advice, he did not allow himself to be bought and sold the same way that Kamala Harris allowed herself to be bought and sold by Mark Cuban, I think is the reason why he's so Trump deranged. And also on top of that, he definitely wants a position in our administration. And that's what's going on here. And I think that Scott Jennings did a great job of shutting down Mark Cuban's silly talking points that he has in support of Kamala Harris and against Trump. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.